They built everything together, the laughter, the fame, the empire. But when money and fame came knocking, only one of them opened the door. What started as a dream ended in flames. This is the story of how friendship turned into betrayal. Dan and Phil, two best friends, built a YouTube empire until one betrayed the other. Beat of silence. Then we jumped straight into fire, chaos, and heartbreak. Flames danced in the dark night. The air smelled like smoke and broken dreams. Dan stood in front of the studio they built together. Now it was burning. Everything, the lights, the cameras, the memories, was turning to ash. People screamed behind him. Firefighters rushed in and out, spraying water everywhere. But Dan didn't move. He held a small, half-melted camera, the same one they used when everything began. He could still see their smiles in it. His heart pounded hard, his eyes wet. "Phil," he whispered, "how could you?" A police officer tried to pull him back, but Dan's eyes stayed locked on the fire. It wasn't just a studio burning. It was his life, everything they built side by side. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down, hands shaking. It was a message from Phil. "Phil, don't come looking for me. It's done." Dan froze. His chest tightened like the world was collapsing on him. His best friend, the person he trusted more than anyone, had walked away. He dropped the phone. It hit the wet ground and cracked. Behind him, a loud crash. Part of the roof fell in. Sparks flew like stars. Dan whispered to himself. He didn't just burn the studio. He burned us. The camera slipped from his hand. For the first time, Dan realized this wasn't an accident. This was a message. And he was the last one left to read it. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. If you're watching the story right now, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing fans from all over the world. And if this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this shocking story about Dan and Phil. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The story is about to get intense. Dan remembered the very first day he met Phil. It was awkward and funny. Phil had tripped over the power cord of his camera and spilled coffee everywhere. Dan laughed so hard he almost fell too. From that moment, they became inseparable, two messy, silly kids dreaming of something bigger. They started making videos in a tiny flat, with old laptops and borrowed lights. People laughed at their jokes, shared their videos, and slowly their followers grew. Every day, they worked together, side by side, editing videos, planning ideas, and staying up all night recording. It was exhausting, but it felt like magic. They weren't famous yet. They were just best friends with a dream. Fast forward a few years. Millions of subscribers. Their names on posters. Fans screaming their names at conventions. They had become an empire, the perfect team. But somewhere along the way, Dan noticed little things changing. Phil would smile at the camera, but sometimes his eyes looked different. He started taking calls alone, saying it was business stuff. Dan shrugged it off. He told himself, fame changes everyone. But deep down, Dan felt a flicker of doubt. Little secrets were starting to creep between them. Whispers about deals, solo projects, and who was the face of the channel. Nothing was said out loud, but Dan could feel it. And that flicker, that tiny seed, was dangerous. It was a warning, because dreams built together can crumble in a second, especially when trust starts to crack. One morning, Dan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. It was a big streaming company, one of the biggest in the world. They wanted Dan and Phil to sign a deal worth millions. They could take their channel global, make it bigger than ever. Dan and Phil sat in their messy flat, staring at the email. Millions. Phil whispered. Dan nodded slowly. This could change everything, but we have to read the fine print. The contract wasn't simple. It said only one of them could be listed as a lead creator for the deal. The other could only be added later, if the company allowed it. Dan's stomach sank. He looked at Phil. Phil's eyes sparkled with excitement. He barely noticed Dan's frown. They argued. Why can't we both be lead? Dan asked, his voice shaking. I don't know. Phil snapped. Maybe it's not a big deal. We'll figure it out later. Dan felt a flicker of worry. Phil had always been the daring one, the risk-taker. Now that risk might leave Dan behind. That night, Dan stayed awake, thinking about the deal. He imagined their fans cheering, videos trending, the fame, the money. But then he imagined something darker, being left out, erased, forgotten. He pushed the thought away. They were best friends. They would never let that happen. But while Dan dreamed, Phil was already making calls. Excited executives, whispers about signing early and securing the lead spot. Phil smiled to himself, thinking he was helping. He didn't realize that one wrong move tonight could break everything they had built together. The next morning, Dan would wake up to the news that would change everything. The world would see Phil's name first, and Dan would feel invisible in the empire they created. The first crack in their friendship had appeared, small, almost invisible, but deadly. Dan woke up to a flood of notifications. His phone buzzed nonstop. His heart raced as he opened the first message. Phil Lester signs exclusive deal with Streamlabs Studios. Dan froze. He stared at the screen. The deal, the one they were supposed to do together, had Phil's name only. Millions of views, millions of dollars, and Dan wasn't listed. He ran to Phil's room. Why didn't you tell me? Dan shouted, voice trembling. Phil didn't look surprised. He just shrugged, smiling awkwardly. It's okay, Dan. We'll fix it. I promise. Dan felt his stomach drop. Fix it? You sign without me, he yelled. Phil opened his mouth to speak, but paused. He seemed nervous, unsure, something Dan had never seen in him before. Dan stormed out, fist tight, heart pounding. He couldn't believe it. Everything they built together, the videos, the fans, the dreams, suddenly felt like it wasn't theirs anymore. It was Phil's alone, but Dan wasn't ready to give up. He went back to the old flat, searching for the camera they had used for years. Then he saw a small flash drive on the desk, the one that recorded all their private meetings. He picked it up, and his hands froze, because when he opened the files, he saw it all. Phil had used Dan's exact ideas in secret meetings with the executives. Every single idea, word for word. Dan's chest tightened. He felt betrayed, not just as a partner, but as a best friend. All the laughter, all the promises, all the late nights. Phil had betrayed it all. He dropped the flash drive. It hit the floor with a sharp click. Dan whispered to himself, anger and heartbreak mixing together. This isn't just business. This is war. The news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with messages, memes, and rumors. Did Dan quit? Is Phil taking over the channel? Did they fight? Dan sat in his empty flat, phone in hand, watching it all burn. He felt like the world had turned against him. He had built everything with Phil, every video, every fan, every laugh, and now it felt like it was gone. His chest ached. He couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, Phil was in interviews, smiling for the cameras, pretending everything was fine. He told the press, "We're both excited. This is a new chapter for the channel." But Dan knew the truth. Phil had taken the deal without him. He had signed the contract behind his back. Dan clenched his fists. He remembered the flash drive he had found, every private meeting, every idea Phil had secretly shown the executives. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. Then a new message popped up on his phone from an unknown number. "You need to see this." Curious and nervous, Dan opened the link. It was a video, their first ever collaboration. The memories hit him like a punch to the gut. Laughter, late nights, dreams shared, plans whispered in hushed tones. Dan's hand shook. He realized something terrifying. Phil's betrayal had been planned, carefully, step by step. Every move, every deal, every smile in public, all part of bigger picture. Dan whispered to himself, voice trembling with anger. They don't know what they started. I'm not done yet. He stood up, eyes blazing, heart racing. This wasn't just the end of a friendship. It was the beginning of a fight. And Dan was ready. The live interview hall was packed. Fans, cameras, lights, reporters, everything buzzing with energy. Phil was on stage, smiling for the crowd, pretending everything was perfect. But Dan wasn't in the audience. He was behind the stage, breathing fast, fists clenched, heart pounding like a drum. Moments later, he stepped out. The crowd gasped. Dan walked toward Phil, eyes locked on him. Phil froze. The smile faltered. For the first time, he looked nervous. Dan's voice was calm, but full of fire. "Tell them whose dream you sold." The crowd went silent. Everyone waited, cameras rolling, heartbeats echoing. Phil opened his mouth, then closed it. He tried to explain. I just wanted to help. I didn't mean." Dan shook his head. "No, you didn't just take the deal. You took everything we built together." Security stepped forward, trying to stop him, but Dan ignored them. The tension was unbearable. Fans whispered. Reporters clicked cameras like crazy. Phil's hand shook. He knew Dan was right. Every secret meeting, every solo call, every smile hiding betrayal, it all came crashing down in this moment. Suddenly, the video screens behind them flickered. Footage from their old videos played. Their first collabs, late-night recording sessions, laughter, dreams shared. The audience watched, shocked. The story of friendship and betrayal was unfolding live, right before their eyes. Dan took a deep breath. This is what happens when you betray the people who trusted you the most. Phil's eyes filled with tears. The room was silent. The empire they built together was broken, and everyone watching felt the weight of it. Dan stepped back, fists unclenching. He had made his point, but the war wasn't over yet. Weeks had passed since the confrontation. Dan stayed quiet, rebuilding himself, watching from the shadows. Phil tried to explain to fans, posted videos, smiled for the cameras, but something felt wrong. Then the messages started. Anonymous emails, tips, and files, evidence that the streaming company had manipulated everything. Phil hadn't done it alone. He had been played. The executives had set him up to take the lead, to push Dan aside. Dan's eyes widened. It wasn't just betrayal between friends. It was a trap from the start. All the anger, all the heartbreak, it wasn't just Phil's fault. Dan picked up the old camera again. He filmed a new video, not for fame, not for money, but to tell the real story. He showed the old videos, the laughs, the late nights, the moments that built their empire. He revealed the truth. Phil had been manipulated, but the friendship they had shared had been real. Phil watched the video, tears in his eyes. He knew Dan was right. The fans watched. The story went viral. And in the end, Dan whispered to himself, "Fame didn't break us. It just showed us who we really were." But the story wasn't over. The world had questions. The fans wanted to know, could they ever trust again? Could the friendship survive? If you were watching this, what would you do in Dan's shoes? Would you forgive Phil or walk away forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like if you felt the tension, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories like this. Your opinion might even be part of the next story.